All right, we're ready to start. Yeah. Thank you for being here. My name is John Henning, and you are in the Introduction to Force.com Code Apex Programming class. So welcome, everybody. I'm one of the technical instructors here at Salesforce, based here in San Francisco. And this is absolutely the biggest class I've ever had. So thank you for sharing your computers. We've got some people in the back, too, that can watch. But this is really exciting. I am a certified instructor, certified developer, and also been programming my whole career and having a lot of fun with programming on the Force.com platform. And so I'm going to turn you guys into Apex programmers. This is our hands-on training class, sponsored by our training and certification group, who I work in. And you get a chance to actually try out some of our tools and dabble in some of the code and get your hands on the technology. All right. Before I start, I wanted to introduce a few other people. This is Will. He's my driver, so he's going to be running the computer for me up here. And we've also got some helpers around the sides here. If you guys could raise your hands. And so during the lab exercises, we're going to do some labs here. I'm going to walk you through working with some of the tools. If you have any trouble or have a question or need some help with something or one of the steps, just raise your hand, and one of our experts will come and help you through it. All right? Now, unfortunately, I do have to do a few PowerPoint slides first. I do want to talk to you about the technology, just to orient you about what Apex is all about. And we'll go through that for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll do some labs. We've got 2 exercises that we'll do. Before I begin, I do want to talk about our safe harbor statement. We always have to show this. If there's any forward-looking statements that I make, please do not make any purchasing decisions based on forward-looking statements. All right. Now, before we begin, we have set up your own personal instance of the Salesforce organization or org for you to use for our class. So I want everybody to open up your browser and log in. So your login is going to be using a username that is your workstation number. So you should have a number, a 3-digit number. And so your login will be admin at, this is at login.salesforce.com, by the way, admin at df09 intro apex, then the 3-digit number for your workstation.com, and then the password is password 1. So it's admin at df09 intro apex number.com password 1. All right, can you go back to, if you could go back to the browser for me, Will? So you're logged in. So I just want to point out a couple things here. We are actually using a recruiter application for universal containers. So if you could just look at a couple tabs we have here. We have positions, interviewers, job applications. These are just custom objects that we've built for this application. So we'll be using some of this data for our example. All right? So this org that you have, you can log in and use it later. I think it's available for a week or 2. And I want you to take a look at some of the code that's in there. We're going to walk through that. All right? All right. Let's go to the PowerPoint. We'll do some slides. We'll talk about what Apex is all about. So how many Force.com system administrators are here in the room? Okay. We've got probably half. And how many have built some apps just through the declarative model without any programming, but built custom objects and custom fields? All right, great. All right, so and how many developers do we have that have worked in Java or C# or some other object-oriented language? Okay, good, about a third of you. All right, great. Well, so Apex is our object-oriented development platform. This is a language that runs in the cloud. And Apex is used to write business rules and enhance what you can already build on the Force.com platform. So it's a way for you to add complexity, add transaction level processes. You can modify the database. You can read the database. You can traverse database or object relationships. And you can put save points in the code and roll back transactions and really add a lot more complexity. So it's object-oriented, as we discussed, and it is very much like Java. Okay? So if you're used to working with Java, you'll be very comfortable working in Apex. And it runs natively on our platform. So it's different in that with computer languages that you're used to, if you're used to developing full-time, you run a build on your local machine, and then you distribute that build to somebody. Well, with Apex, when you write your code, it actually saves it up in the cloud. It saves it to the platform and compiles it and stores it as metadata up in your organization. Okay, so nothing runs locally on your local machine. The development can occur and the writing code can occur on the local machine, but the actual storage of the database and of the code and the execution of that code takes place up in your organization. So it allows you to add business logic and, for example, attach logic to a database save process that runs automatically, such as a database trigger. We call them triggers. They're very similar to SQL triggers. Okay? Next slide, please. So if you've seen the language before, you've done a little research, you'll notice that it's very structured. We use curly braces to write structured code, much like C# and Java. And you can do a lot of the object-oriented things like encapsulation, polymorphism, and inheritance. But there are some differences that will make developing with Apex quite a shift for how you operate. One of those is that it runs in a multi-tenant environment. So if you've ever worked on a mainframe system or a very large system, you're probably familiar with things like CPU throttles and partitions and those kind of rules that you have to play by. So when you write on the Force.com platform, we also have things called governors and limits. And governors or limits are a way for you to be protected from runaway code. So there are techniques we use when we write Apex to work within those governor limits. And that protects you and others from, say, infinite loops or long-running database queries. And so that's some of the differences that you'll find when operating within Apex. Okay? Next slide, please, Will. So one of the things we do, one of the common example of using Apex is to attach a trigger to a database save or to an object. So if I have, like in my sample recruiting app, a candidate object, I can put a trigger associated with the candidate object. So if the object is saved through clicking a save button or a lead in this example, the system will automatically run that trigger or my code snippet, my Apex code block, when a database update takes place. Within that code block, I can do other things. I can go out and read other tables. I can update other tables. Or I can actually cancel that database update that is about to take place. Okay, so I can do things like check for duplicates, send an email, create a task, all in my Apex code. So we use Apex to extend or augment what you can already build declaratively through the point and click or the setup screens. Okay? We can apply business logic like triggers. We can also do a lot more than that. We can create custom web services. So if you want to build a service that sits out there in your org and have another system talk to that web service, you can do that with Apex very easily. You can actually do call-outs. You can do SOAP call-outs or RESTful call-outs to other services as well. Okay? And you can also set up things like email services. So you can set up what I call an automated inbox. So email coming to that inbox is processed and interpreted or parsed through Apex code that I write. So for example, I could set up an email service that, say support questions or support cases come into my email service, and I've written an Apex class that parses through that email and creates data for me in a custom object or sends a reply or does something else automatically. I can also use Apex for creating controllers. If you're familiar with the Model View Controller MVC design pattern, that is a design pattern we use on the Force.com platform for our user interface. So Visualforce is our view, database is the model, and Apex is the controller. So what the controller does in this case, the Apex code, is the interface between my UI and my database, and it does all the business rules and retrieves data from the database and displays it in my Visualforce page. So if you're going to be writing Apex code, you're going to probably be building controller classes for Visualforce pages. So when not to use Apex? Typically, if there's something you can do through the declarative programming model or through the builder, then don't do it in Apex. For example, if you have a field update based on an object being created or saved, or we know we can do that through workflow. So always do, in your analysis, your business requirements, make sure that you are looking at the other areas of Force.com to see if it can be done without building it with Apex. That's our general guidance on that. Why rewrite it in code if you can do it declaratively? Okay, so make sure that you exhaust all the capabilities there first. Next slide, please. All right, so there's basically two ways to build Apex code. You can build triggers, which is just sort of a code block that's attached to an object, a custom object or a standard object. Or you can write classes. Now, triggers can also call classes, but typically we'll build classes for the other services, like our web services, our email services, and our controllers. So triggers and classes. So the code sits out there in your org as metadata and is invoked by these other processes that take place. Okay, so we're not going to write Apex code, compile it, put it on a CD, and distribute it to somebody. Okay, Apex code sits out in your org and is invoked by these other processes that take place within your applications. So since we're going to be, our labs are both, we're going to be working with triggers, I want to talk a little bit more about triggers. So triggers are used basically when we have a database action taking place. And that database action can be an update or an insert or a delete or an undelete. And within that trigger, I can tell what is taking place. So I can say if it's before or after. If it's before, I have the ability to manipulate that data before it goes into the database, or cancel that update altogether. If it's after, I can look at the before and after information and record it somewhere else or take some other action. Here's an example of what a trigger code block looks like. Basically, line 1 is just the keyword trigger, and then we give it a trigger name, and then we say on and then object name. So the object name would be like account, or if it's a custom object like candidate, with candidate _C. We have to use the API names for our custom object. And then the trigger events. The trigger events, we specify what database action will trigger this particular trigger. So it could be after update, after insert, or all of them, or just one, before update. It's the only time I want this trigger to run. Or before delete is the only time I want this trigger to run. So you can specify. And then inside the trigger you have the code block. Now, go ahead. So this is a long slide. I'm not going to go through all this. But basically, when dealing with triggers, we also have to make sure that we understand what else is going on inside of our application. Triggers execute sort of in the middle of all this other stuff that's taking place. So we can see in line 3, in line 6, the trigger before triggers execute, and then in line 6, after triggers execute. And then the triggers can actually fire again one more time later. If some other action, like a workflow update, updates that same table, a trigger can refire. So you have to be careful when building triggers that you understand the whole flow of what's taking place. So we also have special things within a trigger called isInsert, isBefore, and these are what we call context variables. So within my trigger, I can say, all right, I know that this trigger is being fired on several different actions, but I only have code snippets that I want to run based on certain actions taking place in this big trigger. So I can say, okay, if this is an update, run this code. If it's something else, run this other code. Okay, so I can have some more granular control over what's taking place in the trigger. All right, next slide, please. All right. So that's it. Now we're going to give you guys a chance to actually write some code. All right. So we're going to do exercise 1. And in this exercise, basically, this is the traditional hello world sample. And what we're going to have you do first is you're going to use Eclipse. Now, Eclipse is our, not ours, it's an open source program. We have a plugin for Eclipse. We call the Force.com IDE. So on your desktop, you should have an icon for Eclipse. So go ahead and double click on that and get Eclipse running. So Eclipse's IDE stands for Integrated Developer Environment. So this is typically the tool that developers will use to write code. Okay? Once you have Eclipse running, go ahead and click on File and New and Force.com Project. And you should see this screen right here. And so put in a project name. And you can use, what I would recommend is just for the project name, go ahead and use your login name. Typically you can use anything, but this will help you remember what that project is attached to. Because you can have multiple projects, and they can get kind of confusing. But my recommendation today is go ahead and use your login name for the project name. Then for the username, also put in your login name, and then password 1, and then just all right. Say again? Yeah. If you have trouble, definitely let one of our helpers know. I don't want you to take too long if you missed a step. All right. So then click Next. And so what this is doing is this is actually going out to your org out on our platform, out in the cloud, and connecting to it. Okay. Now what I want you to do is click on the radio button that says Selected Metadata Components, and then click the button that says Choose. Now I'm going to have everybody select all the metadata. So what this does is this uses our metadata API and goes out and examines the schema of your org. The schema is data that describes data. So it shows you what tables you have and all the classes. And I want you to click on Select All so that your screen looks like this. So all of the metadata folders show a green check mark. Okay? And then click OK. And you'll notice on the left it lists out all of the objects, names of the objects. And you'll see all these custom tables. You'll see some classes. And so it's gone out and logged into your org and examined it. And then when you click Finish, so you can go ahead and do that, it's actually going to pull down that metadata to the local workstation. Okay? And you will work on that locally on your machine. So it makes a copy of all the metadata and pulls it down into it's basically an XML file. So now, since this is stored as metadata locally, you can then do things such as take this file that includes all of your Apex code, all your triggers, all your classes, all your custom object definitions, and check it into a source code control system. So if you use Subversion or some other source code control, CVS, you can check this in and out and have true development management tasks within your development group. Okay? Even though everything's in the cloud, you can have a local copy, and you can do versioning and those kind of techniques that are required for development teams. Okay? All right, so on the left, you can browse through all those objects. So, Will, let's open up the objects and scroll down to candidates, candidate. Yeah, double click on that. And then look at the source. No, down at the bottom. Source, yeah. Yeah, there we go. So that's what metadata looks like. So what we did was we opened up the objects, which are, the database table definitions, basically. It's simply put. They're more than that, but think of, conceptually, they're the same as database tables. And so this is what the metadata looks like. It describes what the fields are in that table. So it's has beginning, ending tags. Okay? And you can actually, don't do this now, but you can actually add new fields to a custom object right here. And when you click Save, it'll add that field to that object up in the cloud, in your development instance. Okay? All right, you can go ahead and close that. All right, let's go back to the browser for a second. I need to show you guys something first. So if you click on the Positions tab and look at a position, what we've done is there's a field, and there's a field called Hello. So if you just open up any position randomly in the Positions table, and you should see a new field there. What we're going to do is we're going to write a trigger in a class that updates that field and puts the word world into it. We're looking at one that's already updated, but most of them, if not all of them except one, have a blank field called hello. So we're going to write a trigger in a class that updates that field when you edit a record. Okay? All right. So what we're going to do first is create a class. So you're going to right-click on the source folder and go New and Apex Class. Make sure I give you the right name I want here. You're going to call this class Hello World Position Class. All right? Make sure you spell everything right. Once you've put in that name, click Finish. Now, instead of writing the whole class from scratch with this many people and the limited time we have, we provided a starter code snippet. I'm going to have you write a few lines, but not the whole thing. So on your C drive, well, if you could, on your desktop, there should be a folder. What does it say? And it says an introduction to Apex Code. Just open that folder and open up the Apex Code lab files. Drill down. And then there's a file called hello world position class.txt. So select that whole thing, copy it, and then paste it into that new empty class you just created. So you should have a screen like this. There's an error because it wants some more information. It's not complete. So public class, hello world position class. All right. There's a little to-do there that's marked by the slashes, and you're going to overwrite that with the first to-do that is step 5C. So it's public static void, hello world, left paren, position _C, opening closing bracket, positions, close parentheses. Now you got to make sure that that line, which is line 2, you've got the open left curly brace right after everything. Okay? Okay, so copy paste into that class and then replace that to-do comment that's on that second line with the to-do number 1. Just the way we've done it up here. Okay? So what we did was we have a class called Hello World Position class, and then we've written a method. So a method, think of it as a function inside of a class that does something. The name of that method is Hello World. It's public, so I can call it from other classes. I'm going to be calling it from a trigger. It's static, meaning I don't have to instantiate the class first before I use it. So it's a utility class, for those of you familiar with that term. And it's void, meaning I don't return anything back. I just send it information, it does some work. The information I send it is going to be a list of positions. That's what's defined as position C, bracket. That's a collection. And I gave it a name, a local name called positions. Now, there's one more thing we're going to do, because right now it's got this for loop. It's looping through the positions in that collection. And I've got an if statement. If p.helloc is not equal world, and you're going to replace that with to-do number 2. So p dot hello C double underscore C equal single quote world. All right, so basically it's an if statement. It says if that field on my position is not equal, that's the bang equal, not equal, world, then put world into it. So that's an assignment statement. It's a really sort of simple little if statement. So now, one of the golden rules about writing triggers is that we have to process, we have to bulkify, if you've been reading up on this. We have to make sure we do bulk processing, and that's why we use a collection here. We're going to pass into this class a list of triggers, a list of positions. All right? So now once you click Save, so go ahead and click Save, down in the right-hand corner, you'll see a little progress bar. And then that means it's saving it up to your org. Okay? So now, let's go back to the browser and go into Setup, and then Develop, and then Apex Classes. So now you can see we have that class, Hello World Position class. There it is. So now it's saved it up into your org under the Setup screen. So it's Setup, Develop, Apex Classes. So Eclipse, our Eclipse plugin, is doing that, save, syntax check, and compile and save into our metadata. All right, let's go back to Eclipse. Now we're going to create the trigger. Okay? So right-click on the source folder and New Apex Trigger, and give the trigger a name, Hello World Position Trigger. So our trigger is going to call the class. Now, when you create the trigger, you have to specify which object that trigger is attached to, because the trigger is based on the object. So you have to select position double underscore C. That's a very, very important step. Don't let it default to account, because if you do that, that trigger will be attached to the accounts. It won't be attached to position. Okay? And then select before insert and before update. So we're specifying when this trigger should fire. All right, go ahead and click Finish. All right. So trigger, if we have an empty trigger here, And we're just going to put one line of code in it. Well, now we'll put 2 lines. We don't really need both lines, but since we have 2 here, we'll do 2. All right, so we're going to put position _C, 2 brackets, position. So we're defining a collection called positions. So it's our data type is a position. So this is a strongly typed language. Okay? So I have to define what kind of type I'm using, and this is I'm using the position class object, position _C. Open close bracket specifies that it's a collection. Think of it as like an array. We're calling it positions locally within this trigger. Equals trigger.new semicolon. So all of our code is terminated with a semicolon. So what is trigger.new? That is something special. Inside of a trigger, this is a list collection of all of the rows of data that are about to be updated. So I now have a handle on the data that fired off my trigger. So I have a list of positions, so I can look at those positions before they're actually updated in the database, and maybe add more information. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to tell it, oh, you're updating your position? Well, here, also put the word world inside of the position before it's sent to the database. All right? So I get a handle on trigger.new. Now I'm going to say, now I'm going to call my class, the class that we wrote. So we're going to say hello world position.class. Notice when you click the dot, there's some code complete. So it knows that class has a method called hello world. So just go ahead and select that, which is really handy when you have a class that's got 10 or 20 methods. And then don't forget to terminate that with a semicolon. Okay? So now, technically we could have just put that if statement right inside the trigger, but this is just an academic exercise to show you that in a trigger I can call a class that I wrote as well. Okay? Now, how do I decide what logic I put in a class versus just having it all in a trigger? Well, it's all about modularization and code reuse. Okay? So if you're building utility classes, they're going to be used by multiple triggers or other areas of your system. You know, you would architect that so that it would be a class instead of built in the trigger. All right, so go ahead and save that. Once you save it, it's hot. That means that next time somebody saves a position, it's going to run that trigger. Now we're not in a sandbox, but we're in a developer edition, or we're not in production, let's just say. So it's okay. But just keep in mind, and once it compiles it and saves it, it's live, right? So now if you go to the browser, go to Positions tab, click on Go, find a position. You can see that the hello is blank. Click Edit, and then Save. You can see that it puts the word world in there. Okay? So that we've just created a class and a trigger using Apex that's executed implicitly invoked through a database update. Now, keep in mind that with a trigger, it's not just this one save button that's going to fire that trigger. It's attached to the object. So any updates to that object, whether it's through the API or through another Visualforce page that you've built or whatever, if it doesn't update, it's going to fire that trigger. Okay, it's object-based. All right? How many people got it working? How many people? Okay. About half-ish. All right. All right. Good deal. See how we're doing on time. We got lots of time. All right. How late does this go? 5:45? Okay. All right, let's do the next one. So go to Eclipse and open up classes. This one's a little more useful. So our first example was just, if you've been doing programming, it's sort of a software engineer's favorite plaything is to do hello world, okay? But it's kind of useless, but it helps you understand some concepts. This one's a little more useful. So in the IDE, open up classes and double-click the candidate key, and open up that class, double-click on it. So we're actually going to call this class. And what this does is check for duplicates. So we've decided that we have candidates, people that are applying for jobs in our little recruiting application. And people apply online or wherever we get this data, but we keep getting duplicate candidates because people fill out the form twice, or we get it from 2 different sources. You probably deal with this all the time. We've decided that in order to help with that, we've decided that last name and email address combined as a unique key indicates that's a unique person. My last name and my email address pretty much means that that's me. So we've written a class that checks a custom formula field called unique key when someone inserts a candidate. Okay? So now we want to call that class whenever an update takes place. And how do we do that? By writing a trigger. All right? So let's create a trigger that's going to call this class. So right-click on the source file, click New Apex Trigger, and you're going to create Candidate Key Trigger. Now again, make sure you select the right object. Don't leave it at account. You're going to select candidate. Candidate _C. Before insert or before update. And then click Finish or Next, whatever the button is, Finish. Okay. And basically we're going to do the same thing. All right. So in line 2, put in candidate _C, 2 brackets, open, close, and then we're going to call this list new candidates equals trigger.new. So we're grabbing trigger.new, which is that incoming row of data or rows of data, and we're going to send it to that other class to do a check. And candidate key dot, note it, and then select the method. And then make sure that you put in the correct variable name, which is new candidates, which is what you just called it, and close it with a semicolon. Now, Will, can you pull up that candidate key class one more time? Notice in line 27 and in line 15, this is how we can tell the trigger to sort of cancel the update by doing an add error. So that's how that occurs. You can do your database check, and if you call the add error method, it adds an error to trigger.new, and then trigger.new says, oh, okay, I'm not going to finish. I'm going to send this error message back up to the user interface, and it will display on the user's screen that, hey, this is a duplicate. Please don't enter this. Okay? Or it's going to send that error message back to the calling API program if it's through an API. All right? So click Save, save your trigger. And now we're going to test this. So go back to your browser and click on Candidates and click Go just to see what's out there. We've got a guy here called Joe Schmo, jschmo@theschmoes.com. Yeah. There you go. Copy that email. We want to try to create him to sort of throw an error message, right? So we want to purposely create a duplicate to make sure our trigger's working. So what you want to do to test this is go to Candidates and then New, and recreate one that's already out there, like Joe Schmo. And then the email and click Save. So if it works, you'll see this error message will be thrown when you try to create one that already exists out in your custom object. Okay? Give you guys a minute to What's that? Yeah, if you have a question, definitely flag down one of our helpers. We've got someone up here. They may be busy. Wave your hand. Here we go. He's coming around. Oh, okay. Hey, that's a good question. We have Q&A at the end, but you're right here. You know, you ask me, what the heck? It's a privilege of sitting up front. The question is, can the error message be displayed somewhere else? And the answer is yes. There's two ways to do just the generic add error. You can add it to the object, and it'll throw it up here. If you add it to the field, it'll throw it next to the field. Okay? All right. So how many people got that working? Oh, hey. Improvement. All right. So I have a couple other examples. I've got about 8 minutes before Q&A. So I'm going to drive now for a second. I'm going to have Will step aside. So another common use, there's an infinite number of uses, but another thing that you can do, if you're familiar with sharing, which organizations here use the sharing model of security, the row-level sharing? Okay. So sometimes that can be a little bit clunky, right? You have to click on share if you manually share, and it's time-consuming. People forget. You can, of course, use the hierarchy and the roles and things like that, but you can also do sharing programmatically. So I can write code that automatically adds sharing to data based on logic that I write. For example, I could do a lookup to say, okay, who's the manager, or what condition does this row meet, and what kind of sharing do I want to add? So you can manipulate the sharing data within your application as well. Okay? So there's some examples of that in the org. So you can log into these orgs later and look at that code if you're interested in that kind of technique. There are some classes in there for position sharing. Look for position sharing class. We also have, of course, using controllers. So here's an example of a custom Apex page, Visualforce page, I should say. I'm going to show that to you guys, so you guys can follow along here in your browser. If you go to the reviews and click Go and pull up a review and edit, this is a Visualforce page called Review Alt Position. This is also in your metadata. So if you go to the IDE, on the left-hand side where all those folders are in the IDE, there's a folder called Pages, and you'll see the metadata for this page. You can also edit it here, but what I wanted to show you was this really cool feature. If you click on this checkbox, it actually will go out and open up Okay. In Firefox, it'll go out and open up the second half of the page, and then you can manipulate the data. And this is all done through a custom controller. Okay. So this is also in the classes. You can examine this code and take a look at it later as well. This also has some cool little flash scroller tools on there, and that's all done in Visualforce. Okay? So with Visualforce, I have to write Apex controllers to control the page. So there's a sample of that in there you can take a look at. We can also do inbound email handling. So there's a sample of an inbound email handler class. So if you'd like to take a look at how that works, this class will read an incoming email, parse through it, and create a task and send a response. Okay, so that code is also out there, and you can take a look at that. It's an inbound email handler class. Okay. And our last example is generating proxies or stub classes based on WSDL. So if you're familiar with web services, typically with a web service that is SOAP-based, you'll have a file called Web Services Description Language File, or WSDL file. And that WSDL file describes the schema of that web service, and that schema is going to include the objects and the methods that class performs. And with Apex, we can, many tools like .NET or Java, WS import or WSDL to Java, you can import a WSDL file and it generates proxy classes for you. Then you can use those classes to call outside web services. Okay? So if you have a service like Hoover's or an Oracle Web Service Connector, you want to connect through SOAP, we can take their WSDL and consume it, and it generates Apex code that you can then use in your app to make these SOAP calls. Okay? So we're running out of time in order for me to show you that, but that is out there as well. All right. One thing I do want to bring to your attention is developer.force.com. If you're going to be developing in Apex, or someone on your team is going to be using Apex, you're going to want to get very familiar with this site. This has all of our documentation, reference guides both in HTML format and PDF format. It's got an excellent search capability, and I'm in it all the time. It's pretty rich. It's good. Also, there's a blog section with some great blogs from our technical evangelists and others. There's a lot of great samples. There's also something called CodeShare. CodeShare is where we've had experts upload open source Apex projects. And there's some that interface with Google and Twitter and all sorts of stuff. You can download those, install them in a developer org, and try it out. A lot of good stuff there, and you're going to be in that all the time. I want to let you know about our certification. So I am a certified developer, and that track basically is taking the Dev 401 class, the Dev 501 class. There's 2 exams. I really highly recommend certification. The first exam, you have to take the first one to do the second one. You can't skip. But we also have a couple other new classes coming out. If you're not a traditional object-oriented programmer and you want to start out with something not as complex, we do have a new class called Dev 531, and that will teach some fundamentals about object-oriented programming in that class. So it doesn't just assume that you already know it. We also have an integration class called Dev 502. That's a 3-day class where you learn about integrating with outside systems, learn about the web API, and building web services in more detail. And in that class, we have both Java and .NET labs that we work in either one of those 2 languages for those labs. All right, next steps. We do have a survey link on the home page of your org. Please do make sure that you fill out our survey, please. You go to Home and Useful Links, Course Survey. All right. Make sure you select the class. Sign up for a class, and you can get a 10% discount and get certified. So I hope that was useful for you to get a taste of doing some Apex development. Kind of gave you a feel for the concepts. Oh, and also, please, we have a training account executive. Dante is in the back. Dante, could you raise your hand and wave? So he's back there. If you are interested in registering for a class or want to talk to him, have him call you sometime next week, you can get more detail, please do that. So thank you for your time, and good luck with the Apex programming. I hope to see some of you in a class sometime soon. And I'm here. We're open for Q&A right now, so if anyone has a question, Sebastiano has the microphone right here, so raise your hand, please, if you have a question. Up here.
Sure. The 502 class, the integrations.
Yep.
Is there any pre-requirements to that one, or can you go prerequisites? Do you have to go to the other classes before you come to the integration?
Yeah, to take a class, you do not need to take the 501 to go to the 502. No, because in fact 502 you're programming in .NET or Java. Yeah. Any other questions? Right behind you.
It wasn't clear from the trigger code how the last name got tied in. We could see where the email was checked. It looked like it was in the map.
Okay, good question. So it wasn't clear where it was checking the email. So the trigger was calling a class, and the class was checking a formula field. So if you go to the candidate object in setup and then under objects, there's a formula field on candidate that combines email and last name. It's called unique key. So the class looks at that and compares it to what the user entered. And if it finds it, it goes out in the database and looks. And if it finds it, it sends an error back to the user. Does that help?
Candidates, right? Candidates. No, that's fine.
Okay, I can come down in a second and show you. Anybody else have a question? No? Okay. I guess that's it. Thank you.